Almost every Pokemon game, official or not, is going to have you exploring some big landmass or a collection of smaller islands. But what about other planets? You know, that's an idea I'm really surprised it's taken this long to be explored. And finally getting my hands on a game that does dive into the concept, I can't say I was disappointed. In Lethalmon, you'll follow the story of a civilization forced to leave the Pokemon world we all know and love, traveling across space searching for ways humans and Pokemon alike can continue thriving. What role do you play? A former Team Rocket grunt, forced to explore nearby worlds, collecting data, Pokemon, items, whatever else you can find that assists the human race, and eventually earn your freedom. Now, I know that sounded like a mouthful, but in reality, the intro segment explaining all of this will only last a few minutes, before you're finally thrown into its core gameplay loop. Lethalmon is very clearly a roguelike, yet in my opinion, it doesn't feel nearly as restrictive or as punishing as one. Each day, you'll be given a limited number of steps to explore a random planet, and once extracted, every item and Pokemon you collect is yours to keep. But here's the catch. The only way to obtain any form of currency is to sell the items or mons you've collected. And trust me, you're going to need money to buy Pokeballs, healing, TMs, upgrades. Even the Pokemon Center even requires a small fee to be used for the next few days. Where things get really interesting is after every 3 days, where you'll be forced to battle a random gym leader. I said this game was less punishing than the average roguelike, as you do keep Pokemon even after they faint, yet whiting out will consume one of your limited lives, making it crucial that you come to every challenge prepared. Lethalmon has a very engaging and thought-provoking gameplay loop, creating one of the few Pokemon experiences where I actually felt the need to perfectly manage my resources. If you're a fan of roguelikes, I highly recommend it, and even if you aren't, I still recommend giving it a try, because while I myself am often put off by the genre, there are a few select cases where it's very hard to stop playing. If you asked me what I believed was the most anticipated Pokemon ROM hack of all time, I don't think I could imagine any other answer than Light Platinum DS. And for as long as I can remember, it's one many people thought would never see the light of day. But just a few weeks ago, the creator would come out and deliver the update we've all been waiting for. And yes, unlike the version from a few months ago, it is finally in English. If you're a newcomer to the scene, I need to stress that the original Light Platinum was arguably the most impressive and influential Pokemon ROM hack prior to the release of Pokemon Unbound. 2 entire regions mapped out using high-quality customly made tile sets, offering a dex of about 400 Pokemon across the first 5 generations. Saying that was just unheard of in 2012 would probably be an understatement. So, over a decade later, the remake of course had huge shoes to fill. And just as the original pushed the GBA to what could be considered its limits for the time, Light Platinum DS does the exact same for its intended console, yet probably not in the way you might imagine. Most NDS hacks are focused on providing advanced gameplay systems to match those we already have in the GBA. And while I obviously have zero problem with that, in fact I even praise it, I have to say I really appreciate how Light Platinum DS is much more focused on providing a more authentic Pokemon adventure in one of the most beautiful regions I've ever seen. Light Platinum DS pushes the 4th generation's HD 2D style to the absolute limit, with beautiful landscapes, camera panning to show off gigantic structures or views in the distance, and even 3D puzzles. Not to mention, it also fixes the original's biggest problem, the story. No more rival fights every 5 minutes, and the antagonist group seems to actually have an identity outside of just wanting to capture legendary Pokemon. But I'm sure you're wondering, why did this update take almost 10 years to come out? And does that mean the next one is going to take just as long? Well, no, I don't think it'll take that long at all, and my reasoning for that is the same as my answer to the former. Other than this being arguably the most ambitious ROM hack ever created, by someone who's likely balancing its development with other real-life responsibilities, it's likely the case that what we see in the hack has only been recently possible, with all of the very recent advancements in the NDS ROM hacking scene. But it still has about 12 to 15 hours of gameplay across 5 gyms. So I do highly recommend giving it a try if you aren't afraid of unfinished hacks. Up next, we have Pokemon Amethyst, a very simple ROM hack made by someone with zero previous experience creating them. And you know what? I think they did a pretty good job. It plays well, and I didn't encounter any game-breaking bugs. Although, I will warn that if you're someone who's looking for a good quality story or adventure experience, this is not the place you're going to find it. The hack uses entirely default assets for the overworld, with a few places feeling a bit unfinished in my opinion, and the plot, no offense, feels like any other. On the contrary, the battle scenes look pretty good, and the Pokemon variety is very abundant. I also want to compliment that Gym is being focused on individual gimmicks that have been in the series for over 2 decades now, was a really interesting concept. For example, Gym 1 is themed around terrains, Gym 2 status effects, Gym 3 weather, and so on. It opened up a lot of team building ideas that were no longer restricted by countering the type of the next leader. I do, however, have 2 pieces of criticism, and they kind of go hand in hand. First, I think locking the immediate access of the EXP share to the lowest difficulty setting is a bit strange, especially considering that the hard mode has forced level caps to keep you from, well, over-leveling. I've played way too many fan projects that restrict or reduce easy EXP gain on a higher difficulty level, while also pairing said restriction with a level cap. Thankfully, it's something that in this hack didn't cause too much extra grinding. It's just a philosophy I've never really been able to make sense of. Where I started to get a bit frustrated is how often NPC trainers try and swap their Pokemon. And I'm not just talking about bosses, I mean like on average having 2 swaps per route trainer, which again on its own isn't that big of a deal, but considering that switch training was my best way of leveling weaker Mons until the 4th gym, the number of swaps made that method take a lot more time and effort. But you know, other than that, this is a pretty good hack for someone's first project. It's also fully documented, and there's even 167 pages of the developer's philosophy, which I found pretty interesting. If you're enjoying the video or have already found at least one new game to play, I would really appreciate it if you were to subscribe. Only 14% of my viewers are currently subscribed, and doing so gets you notified of every new and recently updated Pokemon fan project, or whatever already complete stuff I think is worth a playthrough. So a lot of people really wanted me to play Pokemon Void, a fan game whose development was led by a large YouTuber, inspired by their massive collection of Fakemon, which is really cool. I remember back in the day watching New Region Fakemon Dex content, and always coming out disappointed due to the lack of them being actually playable. I don't expect every YouTuber to spend years creating or directing their own game, it just felt like I was having candy dangled in front of my face every time I clicked on one of those videos. Void obviously takes place in a new region, and maybe to your surprise, its dex does not comprise any official Pokemon. Nope, not a single one, not even regional variants. Just original Fakemon. It's a design choice I've seen in only a single-digit number of fan projects, but it's not one I disagree with. Choosing to void all canon Pokemon leaves behind any artistic restrictions that would require your Fakemon to look at least somewhat similar to their official counterparts. And besides, I'm not playing a Fakemon game to use Pikachu. What surprised me more than that aspect of the game is just how many Fakemon there are. In similar projects, I enter a route for the first time and expect to see 2, 3, maybe 4 unique encounters. But there were like 7 to 8 new Pokemon to be found in each location. I thought at this point, my expectations had been met. Surely there couldn't be anything else this game provides to further surprise me. Except maybe, you know, a new gimmick. Official or not, every previous regional gimmick I've encountered has either focused on a Pokemon's attacks or their physical form. In Void, however, you get a special band that lets you swap your Pokemon's ability mid-battle. My only hope is that the difficulty of the game can reach a point where this becomes threatening to face, because in my opinion, the current content of the demo is quite easy. Void at the moment is in a very early state, and if it weren't for the number of people asking me to play it, I probably wouldn't have given it this long of a segment. The Fakemon are really good, and there's a ton of unique features to be explored. I think it's safe to say that the game has a very bright future ahead of it, and I am very much looking forward to playing more. A few days ago, the trailer for a new Pokemon fan game, Pokemon Copper, was released alongside, well, the entire game. And after playing it for a little while, I came out feeling pretty mixed about the overall experience. Copper includes 113 new Pokemon, designs of whom I found quite appealing. Like every Fakemon game, of course there are always a few duds or designs that just didn't really speak to me, but I want to say at least 90% of the dex was well made. Though if it weren't obvious, they do lack back-facing sprites, which isn't something I'm going to spend too much time criticizing, as it felt more intentional as someone who just wasn't able to provide or create back sprites for every new Pokemon. I was more disappointed by the lack of cries, as those are what I feel really add to their personality. However, it's moving away from the Fakemon where I actually started to lose interest in the game. If you've watched my content for long enough, you're probably aware I'm not a fan of the Fire Red and Leaf Green tile set. But even with those opinions aside, I feel it's not even used to its full potential in this game. Maps feel way more open than necessary, and lack a good amount of diverse qualities. The region is based on Arizona, which from my understanding is a pretty flat and dry place, yet most of the towns just felt like houses placed on an empty plot, connected by stone pathways. Even without the cries or back sprites, the Fakemon hard carried this game's enjoyability, especially within their gameplay. So if you aren't bothered by anything I criticized during this segment, I do recommend trying the game yourself. Last but not least is Pokemon Axon. This is one of those games I often see the developer posting about on social media, leaving me thinking, wow, I really can't wait for this to be in English. And now, it's in English. On paper, Axon is a pretty standard Pokemon adventure. Leave home with a Pokedex, collect gym badges from various towns, battle your two rivals every now and then, and stop an evil team from getting their way. Narratively is where I think this game is at its weakest, although I will say that is not because of the translation. Spanish to English fan games often get criticized for having low quality translations, but other than a couple terms being used incorrectly, the way each sentence flowed read almost like it was natively written in English. I also want to stress that what I said before doesn't mean the story is bad. I just don't think very much happens that I can say feels different from many fan projects I've played in the past. But everything else is really good, especially the world design. Every hour or so, I felt like I was traveling through some place completely new and original aesthetically. And I'm not just talking about the biome type, I mean the layouts, buildings, the way people and Pokemon look in the overworld. There's a massive junkyard leading into a town built from scrap, an underwater tunnel taking you across the ocean, dozens of structures and brands designed after Pokemon. The world feels so alive that you can't even blame me for having the most minuscule amount of frustration that the story didn't try a little harder. And these maps don't just look good, they feel really rewarding to explore. But on the topic of visual appeal, Axon doesn't just have somewhat animated backgrounds, yet also moving sprites for every single one of their regional forms, some of whom I feel really go above and beyond with the creativity in their designs. The current version of Pokemon Axon has 6 gyms worth of content, allowing you to reach the late level 50s. So while it may not be completed, you can at least reach what would normally be considered the end game in an official title. But that's just about going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed, and be sure to subscribe for more Pokemon fan games and ROM hacks. Thank you to my channel members for their continuous support, and have a nice rest of your day.